ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಹಾಗೂ ಋತುಮಾನ.com ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಆಶ್ರಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಜರುಗ್ತಾ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಅರಿವಿನ ನಿರಿಗೆ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಸರಣಿಯ 17ನೇ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಉದ್ದೇಶಿಸಿ ಮಾತನಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಟಿ.ಎಸ್. ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಅವರು. ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನವರಿಗೆ ತಿಳಿದಿದೆ. ಅವರು ಇವತ್ತು ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಜೋಗಿಗಳ ಮಹಾಭಾರತ ಸಾಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಕ ಓದುಗಳು ಅನ್ನುವ ವಿಷಯದ ಮೇಲೆ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತನಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಅವರು Satyanath is a former professor in the Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies, University of Delhi. He has formal training in Kannada language and literature, linguistics, comparative literature. Translation studies, cultural studies, and folklore studies are his areas of interest. He has published extensively in these areas, both in English and Kannada. He was a visiting scholar at University of Pennsylvania, America, Philadelphia, USA, University of Georgetown, Guyana, and a visiting professor at Kannada University, Hampi. He has presented papers in the universities in USA, Sweden, Turkey, Germany, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. Satyanath's conceptualization of Indian literature extensively makes use of transmediality and interdisciplinarity. He is also an executive council member of the Comparative Literature Association of India and is closely associated with Delhi Comparis, a group of teachers and students engaged with comparative literary studies on the campus of the University of Delhi. Professor of Emeritus, he is now Professor of Emeritus of Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literature Studies, University of Delhi. His major writings are like this: Process and Models of Translations, Cases from Medieval Kannada Literature, Problematizing Folk Popular Traditions, the pastoralist traditions of Mailara, Mallaya, Kandoba. World literature in the context of Indian literatures, Nadu and Desha, on the construction of regional and national identities in modern Kannada representative tellings and renderings in medieval Karnataka. Religions crossing borders on the emergence of translation studies in India. Testing language proficiency in India, some problematic issues. Processes and models of translation. Processes and models of translation, cases from medieval Kannada literature. Constructing the identity of Kannada mother, a study of representation in modern Kannada poetry. Mahabharatas in Kannada, texts and context. Translation and reception as a cultural process on the emergence of tragedy in Kannada literature. So ಇದಿಷ್ಟು ಅವರ ಮೇಜರ್ ಆದ ಬರವಣಿಗೆಗಳು. ಬಹುಶಃ ಕನ್ನಡದ ಜನಪದ ಮೌಖಿಕ ಮಹಾಕಾವ್ಯಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಮತ್ತು ಮಂಟೇಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಎಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಮಹಾಕಾವ್ಯದ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಮೇಲೆ, ಕಂಪ್ಯಾರಿಟಿವ್ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ನ ತಂತ್ರಗಳನ್ನ, ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ನ ತಂತ್ರಗಳನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಮಲ್ಟಿ ಡಿಸಿಪ್ಲಿನರಿಯ ತಂತ್ರಗಳನ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಹಾಕಾವ್ಯಗಳನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಜನಪದ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯವನ್ನ ತುಂಬಾ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ನೋಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ನಮ್ಮ ನಡುವಿನ ಒಬ್ಬ ಹಿರಿಯ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರಾದ ಟಿ.ಎಸ್. ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಈ ಮೂರು ವೇದಿಕೆ ಹಾಗೂ ನೆರೆದಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ಆಡಿಯನ್ಸ್ ನ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ನಾನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಸರ್, ಸ್ವಾಗತ.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಗುಡ್ ಈವ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಎವ್ರಿವನ್. Before, I'm extremely I thank everyone who is involved in this invitation, and it's a matter of pleasure for me to present my whatever I have little research that I have done in this area to the gathering. I interact with historians, but this is the first time I'm actually going into the group of historians and trying to talk to them. Secondly, I think I'll start with a very personal note. The Kinnari Yogis, my association with the Kinnari Yogis. Why? For that matter, most of my association with Kannada literature, folklore, and other things is through either through book or through CDs or through um, YouTube or things like that. But between 1994 to 1997, I was in Kannada University as a visiting scholar. And there used to be a talk every day between 10 to 11. We used to call it Dinamatu, the daily talk. And the subject matter of daily talk is either one of the students or a faculty member would actually present his or her research in progress reports there, and then it would undergo a discussion and then get new lights. And that used to be a really multidisciplinary platform in that sense, because scholars from all the discipline used to be there and used to discuss. At one stage, I had more involvement in it because I had an opportunity to be associated closely with it. So I suggested that we should actually bring in other forms other than the lectures. What I had in mind was performance. So then the tradition started. And one day when we were going to the university from the bus, I saw actually 3 performers somewhere near Kamlapur, which is 3-4 kilometers from the university. And the person who was sitting next to me was Chelluva Raju. Now he's a professor. At that time, probably he was an lecturer. And I used to call him in singular, Chelluva, who is that? He said, Kinnari Jogigalu, sir. I asked him, can we get them for tomorrow morning's Dinamatu? So he said, I'll get down. You just tell my head of the department that you have sent me for this. And so accordingly, next day it was arranged. I had read about Kinnari Yogis in Kannada folklore books, that they would travel, they visit Adi Chunchanagiri, they go to Kadri, and they also go further into the Nasik and other places, but had never heard them perform. So that performance next day was a wonderful experience. At the end of the performance, at that time, not many people had recorders. So I had fortunately one, a professional Sony recorder, which I had brought from US when I came back. I recorded it on that. And afterwards, inadvertently, it got into a discussion with them. With a direct discussion with them was not possible. So, it went, and that was also recorded. Some 8-10 years back, I heard it a couple of times, but 8-10 years back, I just happened to bump into this dialogue with them for about 15-20 minutes at the end. That opened up actually a new world. Consequently, I wrote a paper for the World Religion Conference, which here the Center for the Study of Developing Societies organized. And probably within a year or two, I wrote this paper, which I'm going to discuss now. This was read at Chotro, an annual conference which G.N. Devi used to organize in Tejgarh. And subsequently, it was published in a volume. This is the story. I fondly and nostalgically remember Chelluva Raju, Rahmat, who is here, and many of my friends who actually working in Kannada University at that time was actually a mad thing. It's a zeal. It's a sort of it's a thorough different experience for me, who had come with a theory with lots of blah blah blah. And for me, within 2 years after coming from United States, I was thrown into Kannada University, and the North Karnataka world showed me an alternative way of looking at culture. And whatever that I discuss here probably started after that. Also, I'm a trained modernist, so I had an aversion for anything that is traditional other than folklore. So it was a slow transformation, and I slowly learned. Thanks to Kannada University, thanks to my friends and teachers, and particularly the academic atmosphere, both the faculty at Delhi University, Professor Shishir Das and others, and also my students, and maybe about 20, 25 of them, who wrote excellent dissertations using transmediality and folklore and the things that I talked about. So I'll stop there about the personal things. Once again, thank you very much. Let us go to the presentation. I have the entire presentation on the slides. So whatever is on the slides, I'm also going to read visuals, and there is some amount of audio that I'm going to play. And I hope I'll wind up the whole thing. I've skipped and deleted a lot of things in the last 2 hours. So. It's not moving. Why is it not moving? Someone has to help. Okay, it's moving now. This is the overview, brief introductory remarks, and then I talked about the theory and methodology that I use for my studies in general, and particularly whatever I have done here. Then I talked briefly about Mahabharata of the Kinnari Yogis. Then, I have 2 detailed points to be made, which these are the Arjuna Yogi episode as a continually evolving system episode, not Arjuna Yogi tradition. And then I'll talk about speciality of Arjuna's pilgrimage. And in the end, I have a few discussion, which are points which I raise, for which there might be, I might try to answer them, but there could also be other answers possible. So let me go. Introductory remarks. Most of our understanding of medieval Indian culture is based on the study of agrarian communities. Such an inherent agrarian bias has not only marginalized the representational systems of the hunters, pastoralists, and nomads, who did not form a part of the settled agrarian community, but has also excluded the artisan and servicing communities who did form a part of such settled agrarian communities. Apart from this, we also need to remember that many of the non-agrarian communities, despite living amidst agrarian communities for several centuries, maybe from 13th, 14th century onwards, have been able to maintain certain aspects of their non-agrarian culture. This is Bailey 1987, Satyanath 2001. Hence, what we identify today as the cultural aspects of the agrarian system may often turn out to be knowledge and skills of non-agrarian communities that have integrated into the agrarian community over a period of time. By implication, it has become customary to treat the entire traditional knowledge system, be it agrarian or pastoralist or hunters or other nomadic communities, as belonging to the agrarian knowledge system. It is this aspect of domination and appropriation of knowledge systems of other communities by the agrarian system that also need to be scrutinized and problematized in order to have a clear understanding of the knowledge system of agrarian and non-agrarian communities. A brief history of the changes that swept over South India is relevant here for the purposes of understanding the historical background of non-agrarian communities like the Kinnari Yogi. The beginning of the 11th century CE witnessed a significant structural change within the South Indian social and political system. Historians are very, very much aware of this. This has been pointed out as a vertical split between the right-hand caste, principally agrarian, and the left-hand caste, artisan and servicing communities, and an increasing vertical mobility of the left-hand caste. They could be broadly called as core and periphery zones. I'll come back to it again. The impact of such a change could also be noticed in other spheres of cultural representation. For example, the textures of bhakti underwent radical changes, and changes in temple and military architecture also reflect such a shift. Whereas the Nayanars The Shaivite saints belonging to 7th to 10th century CE in the Tamil Nadu region were conspicuously agrarians. They were Vellalas, right-hand caste. The Veerashaiva saints in Karnataka during the post-10th century period constituted mostly artisan and servicing communities, left-hand caste. Apart from this, during the post-13th century period, the disintegration of powerful kingdoms in South India brought an increasing inflow of pastoralists, nomads, and hunters into the agrarian system. Accordingly, the post-13th century period witnessed a shift of power into the hands of the feudal warlords, often designated as Palayakaras and Nayakas. This brought in significant changes within the newly developing composite agrarian system, which is characterized by a tank-based irrigation system, as against the earlier river valley-based agrarian system. It also introduced several new knowledge systems and skills of non-agrarian communities into the agrarian system. Hence, the post-13th century South India needs to be understood rather as a composite system with a blending of agrarian and non-agrarian knowledge systems. The discussion done so far suggests that the ecological changes that have been brought out by the river valley-based agrarian system through a transformation of non-agrarian interface zones into agrarian zone had far-reaching consequences for the agrarian system itself. It brought forward structural, political, social, religious, and representational changes within the tank-based irrigation system, which was jointly engineered by the erstwhile agrarian and the newly joined non-agrarian communities. This is the schematic diagram through which I am trying to represent as the cultural system. The central core is actually agrarian. It is relatively static, static in the sense Sthavara, that is the tension between Sthavara and Jangama. Sthavara and Jangama Jatis. The Jangama Jatis have a body-centric knowledge of their professional skills on the body. They move wherever they want easily, whereas land agrarians are stuck to land. So there is this approximate period in India. This is first millennium. I am using Sheldon Pollock and his arguments like that to some extent. Then the periphery zone is artisan and community, which have a Jangama itinerary capability. This is around 1000 to 1400 CE. Then you always had a fringe zone of pastoralists, hunters, nomad, and they flow into that around 1400 CE. This is where Kinnari Yogis come from. For example, what happens is, let us go to the next slide. This is how we can construct a typology of Kannada literary system. In the first column, we have ecosystem. Second one, public sphere. Third one is mode. Fourth is genre that is used. And the last one is hero. There might be violations, but broadly this falls into that category. River valley based agrarian system, which I call the core zone. It has a core trope of first type, and it is dominated by genre like Champu, highly ornamental and highly Sanskritic in nature, classical in nature, to put it the other way. And it's cryptocentric. It always for reading. And the genres during this period are Muktaka, Mahaka. I'm also keeping the Sanskrit literature in mind. Muktaka, Mahakavya, Purana, and drama. Drama means Nataka. And in all these, it's the king who is normally the hero. Then you have the artisan and servicing caste system, which is 1150 to 1600, or a little this side, that side, which I call the periphery zone. The heroes are bhaktas and god here, and then temple or matha trope, this I call, and the important genre is Ragale and Shatpadi. And the mode of transmission is writing, of course, but it is phonocentric. It is through recitation and singing, Gamakavachana and things like that. And the prominent thing is Vachana, Charite, Purana, Mahakavya, etc. And then when the tank-based agrarian system finally sets in, it's the fringe zone system. This is again, poetry is written in the court, and there are a lot of it outside, outside court, which I call Sangatya and Tripadi are the dominant genres. And the thing is body centric, it is singing and performance. It's around this time that the Yakshagana comes into picture. And then so you have Kirtane, Charite, Kavya, Yakshagana, etc. And the heroes are chieftains, Palegaras, Nayakas, and things of that sort. It is with this understanding we start. Thus, the period of post-10th century South India witnessed changes in all walks of life, prompted initially by a conspicuous dominance of the upward mobility of artisan and servicing caste on the one hand, and a subsequent influx of non-agrarian communities such as the pastoralists, nomads, and hunters, from the non-agrarian interface zones on the other. In particular, these changes and transformations that South India underwent during the post-13th century period has to be viewed and understood as a period in which non-agrarian communities, their ideology and cultural aspects played a significant role in formulating the political, religious, and cultural developments of the region. The need and also the pressure to accommodate, assimilate, and rework the economic, religious, and cultural aspects of this newly formulated ecosystem led to several changes. Such changes could be seen in the representations of bhaktas. For example, Kannappa becomes an important bhakta. His hagiography works reworked out. His iconography works reworked out. The Sthala Purana changes, to accommodate more and more sacrilegious things. From the interface zone being incorporated into the agrarian system of bhakti, and the changes in hagiographies, Sthala Puranas, and other representational systems. It is with such an understanding of post-13th century South India, we need to understand an itinerary community such as the Kinnari Yogis. The historical background outlined above is essential for the study of Kinnari Yogis, as they not only constitute a religious community of itinerary people, but also were an integral part of an eco-cultural system that was jointly developed and maintained by non-agrarian communities, playing a significant role in it. And here briefly I discuss the theory and methodology that I use normally for studies of this sort. Within the context of this discussion, an attempt has been made here to map a comparative Indian literary culture by making use of the following criteria. 1. Multilinguality that suggests creation of multiple tellings, renderings, and translations, some of them parallel. This implies that a comparative framework is essential to the understanding of such representations. 2. Transmediality and pluralistic social epistemology that suggests that variant texts could exist side by side as they are produced and consumed by different public spheres. While transmediality is the strategy to cater to the need of diverse public spheres, pluralistic social epistemology suggests the monopolistic control that performing communities have on their own knowledge systems. Then a marginocentric perspective. Marginocentrism that suggests the possibility of interactions not only between the center and the margin, but also among the margins themselves, suggesting the possibility of viewing such interactions as counter systems, even alternative systems. The very fact that categories involved in transmediality, like religion, caste, gharana, and locale, language and region, of the performers get embedded in the construction of transmediality underscores the need for the study of social epistemology of transmediality. Ramanujan 1991, this is that notorious paper which my famed university, Delhi University banned, history department banned it. This is 3 translations. They provided seminal insights into the study of translations in medieval India. Since the concept of translation in the sense that European theories postulate is conspicuously absent in medieval India, Ramanujan designates an indexical relationship between the purported original and its translations and call them as tellings. In Kannada, Heluvike. Peduvikigal. In addition, he further reiterates that tellings constitute a creative crystallization of conventions from a pool of signifiers available in the culture. Although Ramanujan does not make any specific mention to nonverbal representations or transmediality in specifics, tellings do encompass an overlapping relationship between scriptocentric, phonocentric, and bodycentric formats of representation. I use them. Scriptocentric is manuscript, phonocentric is orality, and bodycentric is performance, painting, culture, artisan servicing skills, etc., etc. At the same time, the conventions of signifiers could not only come from classical, popular, and folk traditions, but also could be consumed by various stratas of the society. In fact, Matanga's Brihadeshi's title imbibes Deshi in its title, though written in Sanskrit, while Sarangadeva's Sangita Ratnakara, an early canonical text on music, includes a discussion on both Marga and Desi, elite and folk styles. In order to map transmediality in medieval Indian literary culture, we need to look at how the literary culture and its public sphere operated. The schema of pre-colonial representations included an overlapping of the scriptocentric, phonocentric, and the bodycentric systems of representations. Let us take a look at an example of a medieval Indian literary work, a kavya, and here in this case, Kannada probably, and understand how, despite being composed in a scriptocentric manuscript format, it was consumed differently in different public spheres, namely the home, temple, and outside. In medieval Indian writing culture, texts are divided into parvas and kandas, cantos, and further into subdivisions, namely sandhis, literally means joints. It is actually sandhi in the form of an episode that is usually recited or enacted or represented in sculpture or paintings. In the home domain, the text is usually read aloud for oneself or before the family members after the worship. In phonocentric systems, it transforms into Kavya Vachana, or what we call the Gamaka Vachana, recitation of Kavya, that usually takes place in temples. And in Northeast and other places, there is a specific place called the Namoghar, where it is read, in which chosen episode of a text is sung to the tune of ragas of classical music and interpreted by the singer himself or by someone else. Such recitations usually start with the introductory and the invocatory verses, followed by a synoptic verse, which is Suchana Padya, 3 lines, half Shatpadi, and the entire episode is narrated afterwards and conclude with verses of Mangala and Phalashruti. Those who are customarily allowed to come to the temple can become its audience. Thus, as the public sphere becomes diverse from home to temple, the interpretation strategies are employed to suit the need of the public sphere. Interestingly, body-centric or performance systems too contain a similar synoptic verse that is narrated at the beginning of the performance and follow a similar pattern. In fact, the ragas used for the recitation tradition and the performative traditions are the same. They say, for example, in South India, both of them use nata to start with and probably one of the early morning ragas to end. In this sense, in this case, the text moves into open space, Bayalu, Bayalata, and as anyone could become its audience, further diversification of its public space takes place. Accordingly, music, costumes, acting, and dialogues. Additionally, there could be bilinguality in the dialogue portion, get incorporated into the process of interpretation. On the other hand, sculpture and paintings, painted representations of episodes from the kavyas, located on the exterior walls and pillars of the temple and depicted at a human vision level, provide certain key narrative visual elements that are representative of the episode on which the viewers could rebuild the story for themselves. In a sense, these key narrative visual elements constitute the counterpart of the synoptic verse for the sculptural and painting versions. However, in the absence of a scripted or verbal text, it is the viewer's mental text or mental texts through a dense intertextuality which facilitates a mental reading of the episode. Interestingly, this process is closer to the aesthetic experience discussed in the Indian poetics, the Rasanubhava. However, body-centric systems with a public sphere of highly diverse sensibilities tend to become complex and assume transmedial representations involving text, music, dance, costume, etc. Thus, while phonocentric system subsumes scriptocentric system, body-centric system subsumes both phonocentric and scriptocentric system. With regard to the overlapping of scriptocentric, phonocentric, and body-centric system, it can be safely assumed that their reach is directly proportional to the diversity of the public sphere in which they are located. A scriptocentric system's reach subsumes literacy, while a phonocentric system is devoid of such a literary constraint. However, dialectal and linguistic boundaries might act as constraints for its efficacy, but bidialectal and multilingual capabilities might help an easy negotiation of such constraints. On the other hand, phonocentric systems have to incorporate elaborate interpretation mechanisms into their format to cater the diverse sensibilities of its public sphere, such as temple or sectarian gathering. Sculptural and painted version, on the other hand, operate at a cognitive or mental level of the viewers, having a set of limited cues. They allow the viewer to imagine and create an intertextuality with the viewer's cultural repertoire about the episode narrated in the representation. As we move away from scriptocentric system and go on to phonocentric and body-centric system, we are in fact increasingly encountering social epistemology, such as caste, gender, religion, etc., as these categories not only constitute the database, but also traditionally they are the custodians of the knowledge about music, theater, sculpture, and painting. Figures given below schematically show the isoglasses of different transmedial public spheres and the discussion done so far. This is the pluralistic epistemology of sectarian tradition. On the left hand, I have shown the time from around 9:50, 9:30, the text starts. And it's the pluralistic epistemology, or you can even pluralistic social epistemology on the horizontal axis. You can see, to start with, we also saw a table and a schematic diagram. This is another way of understanding that. The courtly kavya, it's Jaina in nature and scriptocentric. There are homology, for example, the Jaina Pustaka Gacha, the term like that has Saraswati Gana, donation of family manuscripts which Atimabed does. And so, there is a set of homological configurations that is possible with each one of them. So when bhakti comes, you call it vachana, you say speech is jyotirlinga and things like that. So, then, that is the second. Around 1300, you have the popular recitation traditions. The kavya in the vernacular tradition comes up. So they are both Jaina, Virashaiva and Vaishnava. And then they feed into both to folk theater and other things. Then you have folk narratives, which I just mentioned, the Nayakas as the heroes. And you have the folk tradition towards the end. So you have the scriptocentric, phonocentric, and body-centric. These figures assumes that it is not mutually exclusive. The systems coexist together. For example, the Jainas wrote in Champu style for quite some time. And then the Jainas also switched to the Shatpadi mode, which is the another mode of writing kavya. Jainas also wrote in Sangatya mode. So, and the same thing happens the other way. The interesting fact is by about 15, 16,000, if you find Jainas writing in the Shatpadi mode, you have Virashaivas now writing in the Champu mode. So, movements of all sort is possible. It's something like an osmosis pressure. They keep absorbing the different trends that exist in medieval, throughout the medieval Indian history. This is exactly what I said, the pluralistic epistemology of public sphere. The left extreme thing, it's scriptocentric readers, home, you have the text. When the text moves into phonocentric and into temple, you have listeners. So the Gamakavachana, the recitation tradition comes into picture. And then the same thing moves into body-centric format in the audience, open, then you have the folk play of the Yakshagana, and then the sculpture. As the text, as a particular text moves from home to temple to open, the diversity of the public sphere increases accordingly. Not only the gradually increasing reach increases, but also interpretative mechanisms have to be incorporated into them. In the next one, we will see that how this is the structural similarities across public spheres. Towards the center, you have the grammatical tradition. That's how a grammar in medieval India exists, or a text in medieval India exists. You can go back to Vadaradhana and see, this work. Text has a sutra or an aphorism or a shloka or a verse, which has an anvaya or the verbatim, which has a tatparya or summary, which has actually, in a grammar has lakshanas, a text may not have. And below that, you have tika. This is how probably if you open a manuscript of Shabdamani Darpana, this is how you find. So this is the structure of the medieval Indian interpretative. To the left, you have the recitation tradition, and the Suchana Padya, the synoptic verse, is works like something like a sutra or aphorism. Gamakavachana and recitations works like an anvaya. It might probably also could be a tatparya, because there is music, social epistemology, tones, and the social epistemology is associated with raga. Like if there is nata, it's the beginning, then you know when it is. So there is a temporality associated with music, and then there is an adidevate, there is a tune, and all of you know when an asaveri is to be sung, it's a crying raga. So all those things work, and the Vyakhyan or interpretation corresponds to tika or commentary. You go to a performance. I'm taking it to performance and taking it. This is Yakshagana, but you can any performance have this, and when we go later into the Kinnara literature, we will come to know more about it. You have a Purvaranga or preamble, which is equivalent to the sutra or aphorism, and then you have for Anvaya and Tatparya, acting, costume, and music, etc., etc. And the dialogue provides actually something equivalent of tika. So the structural similarities between these three scriptocentric, phonocentric, and the body-centric systems help us to look at the cultural whole, and not as folklore and literature and things like that. So that is the point. And then I have to lastly speak about marginocentrism. This post-colonial model. There is a center and there are multiple peripheries. We believe that the center always powerful, so hence it makes an impact on the periphery. Whereas periphery is culture-centric. Center, the model itself came from Europe, dominant, Eurocentric, it is Sanskritic, it is dominant, things like that. So we can presume a center to periphery thing, and a marginocentrism of from periphery to the center, the way I put the arrow. But marginocentrism could be perceived in the case of countries like India with a different frame. This is an alternative. What you have is you have a conspicuous capital C and capital M, center and margins. But you also have, if you take multiple languages into consideration and multiple cultures, you have C1, C2, C3 in lowercase, and you also they have their own margins, M1, M2, M3, M4 in lowercase. It is not only that center and C and C2, C1, C4, they can interact, but also C1 and C2 themselves can interact. So this creates, that means the type of perspective that marginal centrism provides is infinite, and depending upon the archive that we have, we can keep creating possible interactions between various other things. This is about the theoretical perspective in which I'm trying to understand this. Not everything has been put into it, but this is the total frame. Mahabharata of Kinnari Yogis. How much? Okay. The Kinnari Yogis, a term usually used to refer to a specific group of itinerary singers in Karnataka, is one among the several types of yogis who have been identified as belonging to a scheduled tribe. Among these groups, it is the Kinnari Yogis as nomadic singers who sing and enact the episodes from the Mahabharata and other stories to the accompaniment of Kinnari, a string instrument. The word yogi also refers to sectarian mendicants belonging to certain tantric groups. Jogi, Jogini, Jogan also appears frequently in their sectarian literature as well as the Sufi hagiographies. There is a paper which I wrote some time back, Understanding the Narratives of Peripatetic Communities, the Kinnari Yogi version of the Mahabharata. I've sent this paper. This is appeared in Narrating Nomadism, Tales of Recovery and Resistance, edited by G.N. Devi, Geoffrey Davis, and K.K. Chakravarti. There are usually 5 members in a troupe, which they call Mela, in which there is a lead singer and the rest of them act as chorus. They may also interchange the role of the lead singer depending upon their expertise in the episode that they are singing. Sometimes they may also dance while singing, but this singing and dancing together is a problematic thing. So they while singing, they normally don't dance. In the interlude they dance. Kinnari is a string instrument and consists of 3 gourds, 2 small ones, and a bigger one. The bigger one is fixed in the center, and the 2 small ones are at the 2 ends of the bamboo shaft, which is about 4 feet long. It contains steps called sare. That is controlled by pressing of the fingers on the strings. These steps are made from the quills of porcupine and are glued to the bamboo shaft. The strings are tied to the 2 ends of the bamboo staff with knobs to facilitate the tuning of the strings. In addition to Kinnari, other instruments are also used. Dombarige, a type of drum. They don't have to use it all the time. Flute, gaggara, a type of foot pendant, and gejje, the foot bells. The Kinnari yogis sing and perform what could be roughly called as a tantric version of the Mahabharata. This is debatable, but anyhow, it has a different way of narrating. So, and several other popular stories to the accompaniment of the Kinnari. The performance of the Kinnari yogis typically start with the playing of a Kinnari for a few minutes, then the stuti. It's not just few minutes. At a later stage, I point out there is 2 modes of Kinnari yogi. One of them is playing Kinnari, and that's part of the sectarian activity. Probably that they will not do in front of us. The other one is just playing it, and then of course also use it as a sort of a beat for this song that they sing. Then the stuti, which is an invocation to various deities. Then the episode that has been requested for the performance by the patron, and ends with the stuti performed at the beginning, and finally the blowing of the singinada, an instrument made out of deer horn, which generates a sound similar to that of a conch shell. The Kinnari yogis call their version of Mahabharata as Arjuna Yogi Kate or Arjuna Yogi Hadu, which though narrates the story of the Pandavas in general, gives a special treatment to the part of the story in which Arjuna becomes a yogi and during his wanderings marries Subhadra, Chitrangada, and Ulupi. It is such exploits of Arjuna as a wandering ascetic that becomes the celebrating episodes of the Arjuna Yogi performing traditions. This is the image of a Kinnari yogi. This is from the Karnataka Andhra border. He's not in the dress, but he has, the instrument is very clearly visible. This is courtesy S.M. Krishnaya he was at RRC at that time, thanks to him. And this I have downloaded from the web. This is another one. let me go to Arjuna Yogi episode as a continually evolving system. As a contrast to viewing the culture in a model of binary opposition, implying a power relation of high and low, and sustenance and loss, and the endangerment, living and dead, living versus dead, an alternative model of viewing culture as change and continuity, and as a continually evolving system has been used here. Accordingly, we have several versions of Arjuna's pilgrimage coming from scriptocentric, phonocentric, and body-centric representation. I will be dealing with Kinnari Jogi, a chapbook version, a Tamburi version, and two from the Tamburi version here for discussion. There is Nanjanagodu Nanjanda Pandita, Nanjanda Shastri's Giliya Hadu Mattu Arjuna Jogi Hadu. This is a chapbook which I found about 15 years back near Siddharabetta, somewhere near Tumkur, where I had gone for just to see whether are there any relics of Shakta sectarian tradition. The multiple communities for which the Kinnari Yogis cater, in fact, have been responsible for the emergence of hybrid texts. A chapbook version of the Arjuna Jogi episode is available under the title Giliya Hadu Mattu Arjuna Jogi Hadu, the song of the parrots and Arjuna Jogi. The date of publication of the text is not given in the printed version. Two reprints from 1992 and 1996 have been reported. However, the original publishers of the text have been mentioned as Vanivilasa Book Depot, Mysore, suggesting that printing of the first edition might well go back to the later part of the 19th century. This has been now critically edited and published. As a popular version, what makes the text interesting for our purposes is that Arjuna, in the guise of a Kinnari Yogi, visits a Muslim neighborhood during his wanderings. In this background, we have to understand the Arjuna Yogi Hadu of the Kinnari Yogis itself is narrated in three languages: Marathi, Telugu, and Kannada. And they comfortably switch between Kannada and Marathi, Kannada and Telugu. But Marathi itinerary has now been reduced and they are not going for the last 20, 30 years. So hence that link is lost. But the entire repertoire, once upon a time at least, existed in three languages. That means comfortably there's three languages, and I have tried to verify whether is it the classical case of verb to verb, morph to morph translation. No, I think it goes beyond that, and that still needs to be explored. Anyhow, in this text, this happens towards the end of the third chapter, and all of a sudden, the language of the narrative suddenly shifts to Deccani. I will play that for you. In fact, the text clearly mentioned that Jogideva entered the streets of the Musalmans, speaking the language of their regions. Desabase, he says. Deccani here, I have put it as Deccani. The narration continues to state that the maid servants, bandis of the palace, informed about the arrival of the Jogi to the wives, boobies, in the Zanana harem. The women folk clad in ghosha, face covered, stand behind the door and watch Jogis dance with awe and wonder. The following verses in Deccani clearly provide the nature of the languages and the context in which such a hybridity takes place. This is the one. I have three verses here, and I will not, you are going to listen to that. सुल्तान भी जल्दी आको जोगी के तमास हम है सो तमाशा देखो, जोगी मोती का हार गले पे डाल के करते जोगते नाचते सो देखो. O Sultan's wife, come quickly and watch the tamasha, fun play of Jogi. Watch him dancing with a necklace of pearls around his neck. So similarly, you have three. He says, yeah, this is really good. Haath mein kinari bajate, see. Coming back to Kinnari Yogis, the nature, what is there in the nature of itinerary, clientele, and the multilingual repertoire of the Kinnari Yogi tradition structures the construction of their epic narrative in terms of the shared geography, the multilingual translation, and the hybridity of the text that they narrate. Peripatetic communities actually structure and imagine their sectarian representation systems to suit the production and consumption demands of the sectarian community on the one hand, and the sectarian ideology on the other. So here is the cassette version, the chapbook version. You know, we will listen to it afterwards. This is actually this chapbook version of Nanjangoodu Nanjunda Pandita Nanjunda Shastri has been performed, and I found a cassette of that some in 2002 or so. This is, he sings this. This is in Sangatya format. It's extremely difficult to sing it comfortably with the Tamburi Sampradaya or the Tanburi tradition. But this great guy, Madavalli Mahadeva Swami, who is a remarkable singer, does it. So Nanjunda Pandita's textual version, which is in 4 sandhis, has been sing, and you know, in that he not only sings it, but you know, he also provides an interpretation to that. So when the Deccani comes, he actually subsequently does another translation of it into English to the audience. So you can see here the translation, the interpretation activity is perennial and continuous. You know, looking into this also, this is just about few months back, I just bumped into another version. Surprisingly, this gentleman who sings Sri Arjuna Jogi Kathe. In fact, Arjuna Jogi Kathe is there in the Tamburi tradition, and it has been edited earlier. But this is a new version. It is sung by Mysore Guru Raj. He also has a doctorate, and in the Tamburi version. So here too, he repeats what appears in the chapbook version and what Mahadeva Swami has used. Although, you know, this is slightly different, there are differences. I'm not going to go into the and the songs that he introduces are also different. So the links have been given. I cannot go and play the link. So, you know, let us bear with that. So what I'm trying to say is, Arjuna enters Komti, which is merchant settlement, and the reaction of the Komiti women to Arjuna's beauty is in Telugu. And similarly, he enters the Musalman community, and Apa Dekho, then, you know, they offer him Kharjura, Kalsakre, and Akipadi, which is Kalsakre is mystery of North India, you know, crystal sugar. And Aki is rice, right? And then there is not only translation but also interpretation. And it says written and music by Mysore Guru Raj. The interrelationship between scriptocentric, phonocentric, and body-centric representations of epic narratives in Indian literature is one of overlapping and telescopic in nature, and is highly problematic, involving complex movement from one form of representation to another. The story of Arjuna as a wandering yogi transforms itself from a scriptocentric Mahabharata into a phonocentric folk tradition of the Kinnari yogis. This is with the assumption that one of the Mahabharatas was used by the Kinnari yogi tradition. They could also be parallel independent developments. And then again back into the scriptocentric textual tradition, which is the chapbook tradition of Nanjunda Shastri, and once again into another folk popular narrative tradition in the Tamburi tradition by Mahadeva Swami in the form of a cassette culture, and further again into another Tamburi tradition by Mysore Guru Raj and appears on YouTube. Thus, the printed text, instead of ending its text as ending its life as text to be read, rejuvenates itself altogether into new oral versions and reinvents itself with a new singing tradition, and continues the process of narration, translation, and interpretation as an ongoing activity within different sectarian public spheres, thereby sustaining textuality, orality, and performativity as representational components of a continual evolving system. This is the figure that I have used. I hope it's visible. This is the entire Karnataka peripatetic community of the Kinnari yogis, and then there is a ritual performance of that, and that leads probably, I mean, I believe you know, such a tradition must have been heard. You know, before that there is Gadgi Mata's version. We know the folk versions, how many versions are available, you know, which have been now collected and printed. And now you have a chapbook version meant for reading. I also speculate that the Nanjangoodu text has been written within in Nanjangoodu or in Mysore itself. So hence there is a court present. So there is a language, a dominant presence of Muslims and merchants in the court. So these languages actually gets accommodated because of that. So the multilinguality of the Kinnari Jogi traditions comes from the fact that their itinerary includes Maharashtra, Andhra, and Karnataka. So hence 3 languages, Marathi, Kannada, and whereas the multilinguality of the chapbook version is probably necessitated by the fact that the associations with the Mysore court. And then it moves into the oral narrative, into oral of the Mysore district. This is Mahadeva Swami's version. No, this is actually, there is another parallel tradition of um, uh, Arjuna Jogi tradition within the Tamburi tradition in Mysore district, which is associated with Mante Swami cult. And then that becomes a popular edition, mechanical reproduction through cassettes. There is a translation and interpretation involved in it, which I have called as popular. And then again further into a Tamburi tradition by Guru Raj, which is in the World Wide Web, with translation and interpretation is involved. So, in fact, while the Mysore, most probably either the Kinnari Jogi version or the Mysore district's Tamburi tradition might have given inspiration for the chapbook version here, which is indicated by arrow. The chapbook version definitely gave inspiration to Mahadeva Swami to sing his cassette version, and probably the Mahadeva Swami's version gave inspiration for Guru Raj to come up with another edition. So let us just listen to if it could be done.
किन्नरी बजाते जोगी का पाँव में गुंगर पुकाते जोगी का पाँव में गुंगर पुकाते ಮನೆ ಬಾಗಿಲು ಕುಂತಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವಳು ತನ್ನ ಮೊಮ್ಮಗಳನ್ನ ತನ್ನ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕರೆದಳಂತೆ ಸುಲ್ತಾನ್ ದಿ ಜಲ್ದಿ ಹಾಂಗಿದರ್ ಬೇಗಾವ್ ಜಲ್ದಿ ಹಾಂಗಿದರ್ ಬೇಗಾವ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಜಲ್ದಿ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕೂಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಮೊಮ್ಮಗಳು ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ.
You can see he's not only singing it, but he's also interpreting it. Let us look at the next one.
ಅವರ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತಿರೋರಂತೆ. ಹೇಗೆ ಎನ್ನುವುದಾದರೆ ರಾವಮ್ಮ ಮೋಹನಾಂಗಿ జోగిని భావములు చూడురావే జోగైన భావములు చూడురావే రాజీవలోచనుడు హరివల్లవనుడు జోజిగముడు చూడురావే జోగైన జోజిగముడు చూడురావే కన్నలో కమలలో మో జోగి నాసికములు చంకమాలో
Okay, but he doesn't interpret the Telugu part of it because he presumes that the people around know Telugu. The interpretation is only for the Deccani part of it. This is probably another way of conceiving Arjuna Jogi system as a continually evolving system. That means from the oral to the textual and to the oral, and then I have given the notes. Their multilingual dimensions. They are multilingual traditions, but in the case of chapbook version, you have multilingual text, and then you have multilingual narration and interpretation. So then I have also mentioned about the itinerary public sphere, the print public sphere, or the reading public sphere, and the cassette and YouTube public sphere, and things like that. So they expand. Let me go to the spatiality, and I think in hand. Okay, I think I'll be able to finish it. A new approach of spatial turn in humanities was introduced by the human geographer Edward W. Soya, who used it in the mid-1990s. To call for greater attention to be given to the category of space, which he believed had been neglected. He said, for too long, he argued, Research has dealt exclusively with time without taking its link with the spatiality into account. Soya's concept of a third space is helpful in getting real and imagined spaces together. In his concept of space, Soya turned to the ideas of French sociologist Lefebvre, in whose model of space, the separation of physical from the mental space is set aside. Soya developed a theory of third space in which everything comes together. Subjectivity and objectivity, the abstract and the concrete, the real and the imagined, the knowledge, the knowable and the unimaginable, the repetitive and the differential, structure and agency, mind and body, consciousness and the unconscious, the disciplined and the transdisciplinary, everyday life and unending history. Unending history. Similarly, that's one part of the thing that I'm trying to bring into this. Vasilkov provides an extensive list of the pilgrimages within the Mahabharata of Vyasa. She lists some 40 or 50. Arjuna's pilgrimage comes in the first book and spans through cantos 206 to 2010. And someone has plotted actually the map of how Arjuna went from Hastinapur into Gangadwar and then into other things. And then he further goes into Naimisharanya. This is the Naimisharanya part of it. And then, then into Gaya, Kaushiki, Nanda, and Aparananda. The whole thing is can be seen here. He travels southwards. How he goes to Manipur, this we don't know. He also goes to Manipur because the Babravana episode is there. And then, he comes southwards here. And then, the area in which the shaded thing that I have shown, here at the bottom, that is the area that the Kinnari Yogis travel, and Kinnari Yogis also refer to. So instead of having Ulupi Chitrangada from northeast, they are located in Kerala now. This is a cultural important thing, because when Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream was translated into Kannada in 1896 by Shikantesha Gowda as Pramila Arjuniyam, Pramila comes actually from Kerala. So there is in certain versions the northeastern, and this also has very interesting things. In fact, I don't want to stray away. Arjuna Yogi's travel is closely associated with Gorakhnath's travel into the northeast, and then the Bhartrahari cycle, which is there all over India in several languages. There is an travel involved in that. That's another topic, and I don't want to bring it here. Let us proceed. We can notice three overlapping specialities in the Kinnari Yogi narrative of Mahabharata: a thematic speciality, which we all know, a performative speciality, and a public sphere or linguistic speciality. Thematically, Arjuna's pilgrimage constitutes the speciality of the Kinnari Yogi narrative. However, unlike the standard version of the Mahabharata, in which he undertakes a pilgrimage for inadvertently transgressing the privacy of Dharma and Draupadi, in the Kinnari Yogi version, he does it for a different reason. As Draupadi is vexed with Arjuna, she invites him to play the game of dice, and it was agreed upon that whoever loses the game has to become a yogi and go for wandering. Draupadi prays to Krishna for his help and wins the game. Interestingly, it looks like an inverted version of the dice game of the Mahabharata version, where she herself is lost by the husbands. Accordingly, Arjuna as a yogi undertakes a pilgrimage to the Malayala, Kerala region, not all over India, and marries the princess of the region, Chitrangada, Pramila, and Ulupi during their itinerary. A local or alternative thematic speciality could be found in the case of Kinnari Yogi version. What is interesting to note here is that the itinerary of the thematic characters Arjuna and the itinerary of the Kinnari Yogis are one and the same, and involves a common speciality. Not only the yogis believe that Arjuna is their primordial yogi, but also takes the same itinerary that he purportedly followed in the thematic aspect of the narratives. Some people believe that Shiva is the primordial yogi. Anyhow, We'll go to the performative space, which mentions the name of the different deities with their place names. On a closer look, the place names correspond to the sacred places that the Kinnari yogis visit during their annually migratory route. Let us listen to it. Okay, I mean, if you join all this and plot, there are similar things. For example, in the Monteswami cult, there is an occasion where Maris, 64 Maris are named, and those Maris are called in terms their Satyagalada Mari, and Ummattur Mari, and things like that. My suggestion is, if you consider all these places, then that provides the sacred geography of the cult, and also probably the itinerary map of the performers. Thus, the itinerary and the invocation are actually one and the same, and makes the two a composite system. In fact, this itinerary is actually the annual enactment of the itinerary route taken by the primordial yogi Arjuna in the narrative. Though in the past, Kinnari yogis used to cover Nasik in Maharashtra, the entire Karnataka, parts of Andhra Pradesh, for example, they mention Advani, and Kadri near Mangalore, and in the Stuti, Kadri Manjunatha, Kadri was mentioned, and probably till the river Chandrabhaga in Kasaragod in Kerala, Malayala, it has become much it has become much smaller these days. The last one is the public sphere or linguistic spatiality. The itinerary of the Kinnari yogis, which also constitute the sacred geography of the clientele of the Kinnari yogi tradition, comprises parts of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. This constitutes a highly diverse sectarian public sphere, both regionally and linguistically, to which the Kinnari yogis have to cater. Thus, I have read that. I'll skip this. The languages spoken in the region of their itinerary includes the overlapping, Marathi, Telugu, and Kannada respectively, similar to the overlapping of the pilgrimage of Arjuna in the theme and the invocation. The multilingual clientele and the sectarian public sphere of Kinnari yogis have brought in a spatiality that involves a multilingual repertoire and an oral translation strategy into the narrative tradition. We will listen to that. This is the Marathi part. Okay, that is Marathi. It has not come out really well, and they have lost touch over that. And my Marathi friends here couldn't decipher what it is. Although Bhalire, they identified it immediately. This is probably Telugu. Oh no.
But the privatization, ನಾವು ನಮ್ ಛತ್ರಿ ವಂಶಜ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅದು. ಹೌದಾ? ಹೌದಾ? ಜೀವನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಊಟ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಅಷ್ಟೇನಾ? ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ತುಂಬಾ ತೆಲುಗು ಮಾತಾಡೋ ಜನಗಳಿಗೆ
ಇದು ರಮಾತ್ ಯು ಲಿಸನ್ ಟು ಯುವರ್ ಸೆಲ್ಫ್.
ತೆಲುಗುಂಟು ಹೇಳಿ, ತೆಲುಗು ಒಂಚೂರು ನೋಡೋಣ. ಅದೇ ಹಾಡಿನ ಅದನ್ನೇ ತೆಲುಗಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಜುನ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಮೊದಲು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮರಾಠಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂಚೂರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಯಾವ್ದು ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಿ ಹೇಳಿ.
Okay. This is exactly what I have tried to represent. The oval here is the Kinnari Jogi tradition. There is Marathi, which probably going away, and the Telugu in the Telugu region, and then Kannada here. Discussion, it will take another 5 minutes most probably. Okay, fine, I'll be done. The spatialities discussed here, in particular the performative and the public sphere or the linguistic, public sphere or linguistics, raises several issues. One of them is, what is the function of such itinerary narratives in a society? The easy answer is that they actually bind the subregions, groups, and communities together. Sinologists, for example, Mayer 1988, have pointed out that picture showman traditions were a part of trading caravans along the Silk Road during the early medieval period. Accordingly, scroll painting performing traditions like the Patuas from Bengal, and the Bhopas from Rajasthan, or Manipas from Tibet, used to travel with trading caravans and would perform all along the way. In many such narratives, spatiality of the type that we noticed in the Stuti part of the Kinnari Jogi Mahabharata became integral with the narrative to the extent that the place that the caravan was camping would get integrated into the narrative being performed. For example, imagine, I think, till recently there was a practice of Afghan merchants traveling to Kashmir for trade purposes, and they have a narrative. And that narrative is locally wound with the place where they camp. So, the close relationship between the trading communities and the narrative performers is quite extensive and quite, what should I say, interwoven into the whole process of itinerary. Such incorporation strengthened the bonds between the traveling and the local communities. Sinologists further point out that the prosometric tradition, a mixture of prose and verse, what we call champu, that was unheard of in the Chinese literature, emerged by about 10th century CE, consequent to the contact with such itinerary narratives. They also point out that this happened at a time when there was maximum resistance to Buddhism from outside. They were trying to develop during that, which suggests that most probably these traditions, showman performing traditions, percolated into the popular level and hence emerged upward into the classical tradition from the native popular traditions. The Kinnari Jogi narrative need not have to be understood as a subservient or auxiliary textual traditions of the Vyasa's Arjuna's pilgrimage. Vernacular versions of the Ramayana and Mahabharata have been increasingly found to be deviant, sometimes to the extent they could be called as counter systems or alternatives, counter such structures or alternative structures. As a sectarian performing tradition, Kinnari Jogi narrative could also be understood as a network system connecting the temples, monasteries, and communities associated with the sect, connecting them like a trade caravan that we discussed earlier. The model is, we believe that Karnataka is all where Kannada is spoken. So you do a contour or an isoglass, and everything that comes within the isoglass implicationally is covered by that particular factor that we are looking. Medieval contacts don't have to be, it could be a network, and they are prominent only within the network system. And also from there, they spill over and percolate into the neighboring regions. Okay. The second issue that I want to raise is linked to the poetics or aesthetics that is integral to the itinerary performing tradition. Let me take the case of a bhajan or kirtane or even a tattvapada to contrast with Kinnari Yogi narratives. In the case of in all these cases, that means bhajan, kirtane, and tattvapada, as the repertoire of the tradition is entirely oral, it is the performers who are the custodians of the knowledge system, both in the formalistic sense, that means text and content, and performative music, dance aspects. We can also call them as formalistic and social epistemologies. While formalistic epistemologies tend to have a larger isoglasses, for example, like the text of Kinnari Yogi is fairly widespread, the social epistemologies tend to have a relatively smaller isoglasses. While the itinerary of a bhajan, kirtane, or a tattvapada performer is likely to be smaller as they are sedentary and dependent on sedentary communities as clientele, their itinerary isoglasses are not more than 20 to 30 kilometers. That means the musical qualities have a shorter isoglass. And then hence there is a variation between the adjacent one, between this one and the adjacent one. The Kinnari Yogi's itinerary, on the other hand, is several times larger, running into several hundred kilometers. This crisscrossing of two different social epistemologies, that means that of the bhajan, tattvapada, etc., and the Kinnari Yogis, and their sensibilities help to bridge the gap between the two systems. This also allows osmosis flows between the two sets of sensibilities that leads to better and mutual intelligibility. We have seen this happening in the chapbook version, Mahadeva Swami and Guru Raj's version, cutting across oral, print, cassette, and YouTube public spheres. Lastly, I would like to raise a point on the musical aspect of the Kinnari Yogi tradition. In several Nathapanthi and Sufi traditions, a string musical instrument is used as the sectarian instrument. In this case, in the case of which I didn't mention, the Kinnari is made when Arjuna slays down Hiranyarakshasi and her body becomes the Kinnari. Her vertebral column becomes the bamboo staff. Her breasts become the two goats. Her nerves becomes the threads. Her teeth become the one from which they bridge the steps. And then, for the singing. So, here there is a body, and, we have a very series of such women body transforming into the professional thing. For example, it is the Kali's body which transforms into a furnace of the blacksmith, and it is in her uterus that the iron ore smelts, and they are ball shaped in color. So Pinda, and there are various homologies associated with that. So we have many more instances of that sort. Kinnari is usually played at two levels, one for self-meditation and the other for performance in the sectarian public sphere. It is said that the bean, you have seen, it's two things. A bean player normally sits with his back to the listeners. Here it is being performed as the part of a sadhana for himself. Kinnari Yogi is playing only Kinnari, and their narrative singing has significant differences. While the first one is more musically deep, the second one is only for rhythm, to sing Arjuna Yogi's song. We need to keep in mind that in Tamburi tradition, there is no provision for an exclusive playing of Tamburi. It is always played for rhythm while singing. I'll just listen for 1 minute, look at the difference. Okay, you listen to this one. term tamburi itself is highly enigmatic. You have heard the oral part somewhere else, so I'm not going to show the difference. You know, the two renderings are radically different. The term tamburi itself is highly enigmatic. Though the word could be derived from Persian, most probably in Persian it means it's a royal drum. It has been several physical manifestations all over South and Southeast Asia, all with different shapes and purpose. The term Kinnari is no less enigmatic in this sense. You know, even Ravanahasta in Rajasthan is called as a type of Kinnari. Okay. Though Tamburi tradition and its sectarian narrative of Manteswami show a lot of elements of the Natha set, Kinnari Jogi tradition stands distinct in terms of its larger public sphere and music and the social epistemology. Thank you.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ವೆರಿ ಮಚ್ ಸರ್. ಈಗ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೋತ್ತರಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ. ಮೊದಲ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಸುಂಕಂ ಗೋವರ್ಧನ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಅವರಿಂದ. ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಜೋಗಿ ಮಹಾಭಾರತದ ಕತೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಆರಂಭವಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮುಗಿಯುತ್ತದೆ?
Okay, I'll answer. ಯಾವುದೇ ಇಂತಹ I mean, let me go back to English because there are lots of English. The question was, where does the Kinnari Jogis Mahabharata starts and where does it end? This is exactly the puzzle that probably a scholar will get into. These such stories will not have a beginning and an end. The episode that is chosen by the patron is normally narrated for his purpose, the patron's purposes. Otherwise, it has a fixed structure. The playing of the Kinnari for a few minutes, and then the stuti, and then the narration of the episode that one has asked for. They don't have to narrate everything. They will narrate only a part of that, and then again at the end a stuti, and then the Mangala and the Singinada, which is actually the blowing of the conch. So probably for this question, it's extremely difficult to answer. It can start at any point and also can end at any point. Apart from this, there could be instances where they would do it because it runs. Even the version which Mahadeva Swami has sung has 4 full. It runs for 4 full hours. So I don't think in any modern context, such a thing used to be there. Maybe once upon a time, when the performances used to start in the night and used to end in the early morning, probably it starts. It says, in one of the pieces that you heard, it starts with Kunti Tanayas, the 5 sons of Kunti, and then from there it starts, and it starts from Arjuna's going to pilgrimage, and don't have to be because he violated the rules of agreement of Draupadi is with. The episode starts with Draupadi and Arjuna playing dice and he getting defeated, and then he starts a journey, and then in journey he goes meets 3 different princes, and then marries them and then comes back. So, and when he comes back, he goes to all these Muslim settlement, the Vaishya settlement and other things, and eventually goes and meets his mother in disguise. His mother doesn't recognize him and he feeds him, so there are lots of things. I cannot narrate the whole story, but there is a cycle.
Pradeep sir. Satyan sir, hello. Some, I think Pradeep left, disconnected. Hello, Pradeep sir.
There could be open questions if there is any from
Yeah,
anyone.
sir. One more, my personal question, sir. I just asked. Is there any difference between Yellama Jogis and Kinnara Jogis, sir?
There are 7 yogi groups, it seems. I mean, you see, most of the times for the last 40 years, I have stayed outside. So all my understanding comes actually from reading. One of the 7, there are 7 groups of yogis, and one of the groups is this. And definitely the Yelama yogis are different from these people.
Okay.
I see. I just bumped on the web to a dissertation on that's a dissertation from social studies. So that gives actually a fairly good amount of data from yogi communities in Karnataka. There are also yogi communities outside Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu, and it's collecting all those data from Thurston, from Rangachari, Alantakrishna Iyer, and then Travancore Caste and Tribes report. So there is within the public domain there is material available, but the two are different, and that's how they are differentiated. But there are also yogis in Rajasthan. I don't know whether they have contacts or not, but one of the things that we can explore is, was the itinerary much bigger than it was today? Medieval migrations were of a much longer distance.
Yes, sir.
Added to that, I think there is a small problem with the linguistic overlapping. So that's also the restrictive part of that. But the very fact that Kinnari yogis sang this narrative, say 4 hours, 5 hours epic without any text in 3 different languages, and it's not a small thing.
Sir, many scholars have expressed their.
Sir?
Hello. Hello.
Sir, this is Vageshwari. Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yes, madam. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening,
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Sir, I have a small query. Are scriptocentric and body-centric narratives, are they binaries in terms of the way the theme evolves? So there is a centrality of the theme, but as it keeps on evolving.
I have not used them as in the sense of binaries. I'm actually using them as parallel existing systems. I'll try to clarify it if possible.
Okay.
For example, let us look at Kiratarjunya episode and the work which Nagaraja Rao has done. Nagaraja Rao and Channabasappa, both of them in their works, and even there is a whole volume on Hoysala narratives, the Puranic themes in Hoysala narratives. All these texts subsume that there is centrality of literary work. But from what I see is they could be parallel traditions, and they could have a version of their own. Let me go back to Kiratarjunya. The Kiratarjunya episode in which Arjuna defeats Shiva for the purpose of, or Shiva gets defeated by Arjuna willingly to show an auspicious mark on the shoulder of Arjuna to Parvati. Hence Parvati is there. The very first record comes actually from Patadkal, 740. Until 19th century paintings come, the theme is intact. It is the Arjuna who defeats Shiva in all these versions. Although in between, around 13, during the post-Vijayanagara period, in some pictorial versions, pictorial in the sense the painting versions, you have actually mixed varieties. The argument in favor of parallel development of systems is that position doesn't get altered despite there is a centrality and dominance of a literary scriptocentric system. For example, Bharvi came, he has been claimed to have come from South India and they come from the Ganga coast by people. So this actually provides us an opportunity, and the question is why in the pre-colonial days, why should scriptocentricity become central to everything? The version that with which the sculptors and the painters are familiar continues without any interruption, and it doesn't alter it. So, I strongly argue for the presence of parallel systems. They exist side by side because the public sphere is different. The people who can read the text, they have a different, they are a different public sphere. Or if we don't want to use public sphere, we can call them as publics. The people who go to temples and watch it, they belong to a different strata. So, multiple stratas multiple forms or multiple narrative traditions can exist of a same episode with different public spheres and with different people in the system. So for me, it is not. That's why I call it a pluralistic epistemology.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you,
for
sir.
coming.
And thank you. Pleasure is all mine, sir.
Dr. Chalvaraj sir is here.
Chalva, I'm sorry, Dr.
Sir.
Professor Chalvaraju.
ಚಲೋ ಸರ್ ನೀವು ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್, ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ಮೈಕ್ರೋ ನಿಮ್ದು ಫೋನ್, ನಿಮ್ದು ಮೈಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಇದೆ.
ಓಕೆ ಸರ್. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಸರ್.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಚಲವರಾಜು.
ಬಹಳ ದಿನಗಳ ನಂತರ ತಮ್ಮ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳೋಂಗಾಯ್ತು. ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಸಂತೋಷ ಆಯ್ತು. ನಾನು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ವಿಚಾರವನ್ನು ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಈಗ ಒಬ್ಬನೇ ಒಬ್ಬ ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಜೋಗಿಯಿಂದ, ಅದರಲ್ಲೂ ಹಂಡಿ ಜೋಗಿ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತಾರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಹೈದರಾಬಾದ್ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಈ ಪ್ರದೇಶದವರು, ಅವರು ಕುರುಗೋಡ್ನವರು. ಅವರಿಂದ ಸುಮಾರು 1380 ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಸುದೀರ್ಘವಾದ ಮಹಾಭಾರತವನ್ನ ನಾನು ಸಂಗ್ರಹ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಪ್ರಕಟಣೆಗೆ ಸಿದ್ಧ ಆಗಿದೆ. ತಮ್ಮ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಈ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ನನಗೆ ಇನ್ನಷ್ಟು ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನ ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಭಾರತದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಟಿ.ಕೆ. ರಾಜಶೇಖರ್ ಅವರು ಮಹಾಭಾರತವನ್ನ ಸಂಗ್ರಹಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಈ ಮಲೆ ಮಹದೇಶ್ವರ ಕಾವ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಗ್ರಹಿಸಿದಂಗೆ. ನಾನು ಸಹ ಕನ್ನಡ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ನಮ್ಮ ಬುಡಕಟ್ಟು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಕಾವ್ಯಮಾಲೆ, ಜನಪದ ಕಾವ್ಯಮಾಲೆ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಈ ಕಾವ್ಯವನ್ನ ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಹನುಮಂತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕುರುಗೋಡ್ನವರು, ಒಂದು ಕಣ್ಣಿಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ, ಅವರು ಇದೇ ಕಾವ್ಯವನ್ನ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ, ನೀವ್ ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ತೆಲುಗು ವರ್ಷನೂ ಇದೆ ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ, ಕನ್ನಡ ವರ್ಷನೂ ಇದೆ, ಮರಾಠಿ ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲಿ ಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಮೂರೂ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಚರಿಸುವ ಇದೊಂದು ಟೀಮು ಬಹಳ ಉತ್ತಮವಾದ ಹಾಡುಗಾರ. ಅವರು ಒಬ್ಬರೇ ಹಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ, ಹನುಮಂತಪ್ಪ ಒಬ್ಬರೇ ಹಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅಷ್ಟು ಸುಮಾರು 1380 ಪುಟಗಳಷ್ಟು ಕಾವ್ಯವನ್ನ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದನ್ನ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸಬ್ಮಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ತುಂಬಾ ಉಪಯುಕ್ತ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ನನಗೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಹಳ ದಿನಗಳ ನಂತರ ತಮ್ಮ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿ ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಸಂತೋಷ ಆಯ್ತು. ತುಂಬಾ ಉಪಯುಕ್ತವಾದಂತ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಸರ್. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
Thank you, Chalvaraju. You were instrumental for finding, this performer. In fact, this performer who has sung here is also from Kurugodu. He's called Kurugodu Manja. That was his name. In fact, there is you are indirectly behind this presentation and the work that I have done.
Pradeep Pare. Sir, I'm Aruni sir. I'll take the question. Oh yeah, Pradeep Pare, question ಕೇಳ್ತಾ.
ಓಕೆ. ಅರುಣ್ ಜೋಳದ ಕುಡ್ಗೆ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಫೋಕ್ ಪೊಯೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ನೋಡಲು, ವಿಶ್ಲೇಷಿಸಲು ಕಿನ್ನರಿ ಜೋಗಿಗಳ ಪೊಯೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಹೇಗೆ ನೆರವಾಗಬಹುದು?
ಓಕೆ. ಇದು ತುಂಬಾ ದೀರ್ಘವಾದಂತಹ ಕಾಲವನ್ನ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಸೊ ಅದನ್ನ ನಾನು ತುಂಬಾ ಸಂಕ್ಷಿಪ್ತವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಇಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಪೊಯೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಡೆವಲಪ್ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮೂಲಭೂತವಾಗಿ ಏನು ಸಹಾಯ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಾನು ಇವಾಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕೇಸನ್ನ ಇಡೋಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಡ್ತೀನಿ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ರಾಗಮಾಲಾ ಪೇಂಟಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಕಾರವನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಸಾರಿ, ಐ ಶುಡ್ ಸ್ವಿಚ್ ಟು ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್. ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಹರ್ಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಎ ಜನರ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ರಾಗಮಾಲಾ ಪೇಂಟಿಂಗ್ಸ್. Ragmala paintings, the earliest Ragmala painting is available from Ahmednagar, and most of the Ragmala paintings somehow say either it has a mixed style with Dekhni. So I think, there is a spatiality involved in this region. How I try to understand this is by bringing in isoglasses, which is associated with that. First of all, we should look at the musical text. The earliest musical text that we have, doesn't go beyond 10th, 11th century. Although they say Brihadeshi goes back to 8th century, 9th century, it's very difficult to put it. The word raga itself appears quite late. So then there is, most of these texts are produced from a region. The earliest ones are come actually from Gujarat, the Jaina Sutras, Kalpa Sutras. They come from a belt of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Central India, Deccan. This is also the region which produced bhakti, and that too the singing form of bhakti. You might say Tamil is earlier there, but Tamil canonization of bhakti takes place around 10th, 11th century. And the introduction of Tamil hymns in the temple is around that time. There are inscriptions from Rajaraja Chola and other things. I don't want to go into detail. And this is the region which produced Ragmala painting. This is the region which also produced several folk theatre forms which are famous for its music. This is also the region which produced a vibrating 19th century musical theatre called the Parsi theatre, which became, in all these things, what is happening is, it has a 3-level structure when it is available to it. There is classicism, there is folk, and there is a changing nature in between the center. So when we think of searching for a model of understand, I wouldn't jump and say folk provided the model. That's not my intention. It is at the intersection of folk, classicism, and the eternally emerging hybridity, which I call a continually evolving system, that probably we can understand we can move towards understanding and finding a new poetics. Sitting in either in classicism, sitting in either in entirely folk is not possible, because Indian culture is a continually evolving system. I think I have tried to hint at a possibility of an answer for that.
Question from Indra Kaul. Satyanath, though as a student of yours, one has read this paper a number of times, but its multiple dense trajectories inundate one with refreshing insights every time one returns to it. Thanks for it, another opportunity. This is her opinion.
No, it's not opinion, it's a question. She's
okay.
She's a fairly senior scholar, but unfortunately I had the opportunity of signing on her dissertation. So she keeps I think all these things is possible, Indra, because there are students like you and friends like you with whom I constantly interact. I mean, they make me think, and probably the questions that people ask when I come up with a new or an alternative proposal, the type of questions that are being asked actually make me look. Probably you might have looked at this paper, which was published about 10 years back, and the paper was actually written 14 years back. But in the last 6-7 months time, the COVID has given me more opportunity to sit and read and work and accordingly try to formulate new thing. In fact, we need to now take a relook at bhakti and need to redefine it completely, not as a textual matha centered system, but as a system which was being sung freely by the singers of this type, and it is they who sustained, maintained, and transmitted the text, because not many bhakti poets have the fortune of having a manuscript tradition. So that actually takes us to several other areas. Thank you.
So question from Amitava. Your methodology in terms of material covered and perspectives adopted makes mainstream literary historiography too limited. However, your methodology also makes the task of the literary historian very difficult. What do you think could be the roadmap for making the task feasible?
Uh, this is, I taught historiography in the Department of Modern Indian Languages for about 10, 15 years. So, this is, in fact, these new insights have come from actually the new historiography that is being discussed. I particularly I want to go back to the Latin American history, the East European history, and the comparative history of the Iberian Peninsula, which was very recently written. We don't understand much of it, but their introductions are something fantastic. With the type of, see, for example, when one of our most for the classic history of literatures were written in Indian languages, probably as a first time, in vernaculars, particularly the Sahitya Academy experiment, or the more or less contemporary University of Heidelberg's histories of literature, they had a frame. And I don't think they intended to look at anything other than the printed text. And even in the printed text, they had a selected canon, and the selected canon was introduced for the study of literature. And the dominant discourse at that time was actually of historiography was a close reading of the text. So I think, several issues that is associated with the literary theory actually influenced our history of writing. Now we come to Shishir Das' History of Literature, which is actually a comparative model. There too, the books that include, although various other issues are taken, he comes very close to the popular literature on several occasions, but text is equally important. What I am trying to say is the importance that region, nation, and the text has need to be contested at some stage, and alternatively try to bring in things that actually destabilize these strong constructions. So if that is possible, probably, I mean, we won't be able to do it in the manner that the earlier histories of literature have done, but we can do as sort of a distant reading, take roadmaps or rather timelines, and take probably tables of the type that I tried to look at Kannada literature somewhere in the beginning of this type, and take actually smaller pieces. For example, if we can look at what sort of metrical format came to Bhakti and where did it come? Or, a better thing will be, I'll take the 19th century theater. 19th century theater reformulated its structure by using verse from the classical Sanskrit period, by using songs from the medieval Bhakti period, and the folklore from the contemporary period. So they were thinking of a new type of audience who are elites, middle class, newly emerging middle class, and the ordinary people. So the metrical structures and the song structures from all the three periods were incorporated into it. You take Indrasabha, you take Kalidasa's Abhigdana Shakuntalam, or you take Shakespearean translation. They have the same structure. Kalidasa sings a song in most of the songs. In addition to speaking only in Sanskrit, he also sings a song using a medieval Indian. This actually provides the ancient, medieval, and modern periods history into the metrical structure. I mean, so, I think we may not be able to write a history in the model that the earlier literary historiography is doing, but we can definitely think of alternative models and probably arrive at it, which actually could explain us things much better than the ones. And this is not to argue about close reading. We will stop close reading. No, that's not the thing. In addition to close reading, the distant reading might actually help us imagine and look at medieval texts in a better perspective than what the the other alternative historiography of the earlier time did. I think in this one.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Pradeep sir. Again, some problem, sir. Sir, Chaluraju thanked you for
Okay. Thank you very much.
inside Kinnari Jogis,
Yeah.
Mahabharata.
We should meet Chaluraju, and I want to look at your book.
Sir, Tarikar sir is also there. Sir, Tarikar sir, Professor Tarikar sir is also there, sir. Sir, ಏನಾದ್ರು ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಕೇಳೋದಿದೆ ಸರ್? ತರೀಕೆರೆ ಸರ್ ಅವರೇ?
ನನಗೆ ಸತ್ಯ ಹೀಗಿರ್ಬಹುದಾ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಹೇಳಿ.
ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಸೂಫಿಸಮ್, ಶಾಕ್ತಿಸಮ್, ನಾಥ, ಆರೂಢ, ಅವಧೂತ ಈ ತರದ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಏನು ಪಂಥಗಳಿವೆ, ಫಿಲಾಸಫೀಸ್ಗಳಿವೆ, ಅವುಗಳನ್ನು ಜನಪ್ರಿಯ ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹರಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಕಲ್ಚರು ಹಾಡುಗಾರನು ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಭಾವಿಸ್ಬೋದಲ್ವಾ ಇವ್ರನ್ನ? ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ದಾಸ ಪಂಥದ ಹಾಡುಗಾರನ ತಿರುಪ್ತಿ ಆ ಥರ ದಾಸರಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಹಾಡೋರು. ಸೂಫಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಫಕೀರ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾಥ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿಕಲ್ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಗೋರಕ್ಕಂದು ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತದಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಆ ದೀಕ್ಷೆ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು, ತ್ರಂಬಕೇಶ್ವರಿಂದ ಕದ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೋಗೋದು, ಆ ಥರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೆಲವು ರಿಚುವಲ್ಸ್ ಇವೆ. ಬಟ್ ಜನರಿಗೆ ಆ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿನ ತಲುಪಿಸೋಕೆ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ಗಳು ಈ ಥರದ ಕಲಾರೂಪಗಳನ್ನು ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿವೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ದೊಡ್ಡ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಈ ಥರದ ದರ್ಶನಗಳು, ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿಗಳು ಬದುಕೋದೇ ಈ ಥರದ ತಳಸ್ತರದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲಾವಿದರು ಅದರ ಸಾರವನ್ನು ಜನಪ್ರಿಯ ರೂಪದಲ್ಲಿ ಜನತೆಗೆ ಮುಟ್ಟಿಸುವ ರೂಪದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಬಹುದಾ ಈ ಕಲಾವಿದರನ್ನು?
You are perfectly right. I don't think there is we have to hesitate about that. And that also moved forms from one place to another. If you see the mainstream music discussions, we believe that it is the chords which moved classical music into different places, particularly into South India. That might be true to some extent, but even before chords started this operation, for example, the early North Karnataka dramas carry actually Kabir's Isatanadhaniki Kauna Badai. Okay, it is to be sung in Pilu Raga traditionally. They don't say Pilu is the Raga. They say Isatanadhaniki. Now, how did Isatanadhaniki came all the way to that distance? And my little understanding says, someone from Gujarat who is actually a performer says, Nirguni bhajans are sung in the night and Saguni bhajans are sung in the morning. And this particular Nirguni bhajan, Isatanadhaniki Kauna Badai, Karant Shivaram Karant knew it because in his Janapada Gitagalu he actually cites this bhajan. Now this shows that there was a different mode of through which the songs used to move. My own assessment is it is the Nathapanthi singers who brought it to South India. Briggs very clearly says, from Rawalpindi deep into Deccan, these Kanpata yogis keep roaming around in different places asking for alms. So I think there is, for any sectarian traditions, their backbone of transmission is not the religious discourse. I'm trying to belittle this, people will forgive me, but at the popular level, their transmitters are actually the performers and the musicians, and it is that version which gets popularized at the middle level and the lower level rather than the textual tradition. So what you have said is perfectly right, and I agree to that. In fact, now my attempt to look at bhakti is from this perspective. We need to look at bhakti not as that's why I also argue that you can see Kanaka's kirtanes were in the oral tradition, whereas his texts were in the Matha tradition in the manuscript format. We are trying to use the same poetics, same norms, same measurement to evaluate both of them. You know, our aesthetic criteria here needs to be contested and questioned. We need to separate them, or we need to bring the classical text into the public sphere where it is. See, it is the sensibility of the public sphere which should be the norm of aesthetics.
Sir, thank you, sir. Pradeep sir, Pradeep ಅವರೇ,
Hello.
ಪ್ರದೀಪ್ ಅವರೇ, ಓ ಸರ್.
Hello. Hello. ಅರುಣಿ ಸರ್, ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಮುಗ್ದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ?
ಮುಗ್ದಿದೆ ಸರ್.
ಓಕೆ. ಕ್ಷಮೆ ಇರಲಿ, ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ರೀಸನ್ ಇಂದ ನಾನು 2 ಸಾರಿ ಹೊರಗೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಯ್ತು, ಕಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಮಿಷನ್. ಸೊ ಬಹುತೇಕ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಮುಗ್ದಿದೆ ಮತ್ತು ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ವೆರಿ ಮಚ್ TS ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಸರ್.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ.
ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನು ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿಸುವ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ SK ಅರುಣಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಮತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನು ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿಸುವ ಹಂಗು ರಾಜೇಶ್, ಋತುಮಾನ.com ನ ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿಸುವ ನಿತೇಶ್ ಕುಂಟಾಡಿ ಮತ್ತು ತಂಡ, ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರೇಕ್ಷಕರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ತಮಗೆ ಅನಂತ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಗಳನ್ನ ನಾನು ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ವೆರಿ ಮಚ್.
ಒನ್ ಎಡಿಷನ್, ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಅನೇಕ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರು ಜೊತೆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ತರೀಕೆರೆ ಸರ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಚಲುವರಾಜ್ ಸರ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಜಮುನಾ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಪಿಂಟು ಸರ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸೊ ಗೋವರ್ಧನ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಘಗಳಿಂದ, ನಮ್ಮ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸರಿಂದ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಹಾಗೆ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಿರೂಪಣೆ ಮಾಡಿದಂಥ ಪ್ರದೀಪ್ ಅವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಗೌರವವನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ಹಾಗೆ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತೇವೆ. So Satyanathan sir, it was excellent presentation. We are very happy, and we hope we will have some more sessions like this, sir. Very interesting. Thank you one and all. Thank you. Pradeep sir.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪುನಃ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಸತ್ಯನಾಥ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರ ದೆಹಲಿಯ ಅನೇಕ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ಮತ್ತು ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. I collectively express my sincere thanks to the students of Satyanath sir. They're from Delhi. Thank you very much.
They are taller than me in several respects. These students, not physically, intellectually too.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and hope we'll meet you soon and see you soon in Bangalore for other forums and other programs. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.